For a few seconds, neither Mike nor I moved. The man's shadow was still visible underneath the vault door. Then Mike leaned toward me and whispered, "How many exits?" I looked around. 1. He closed his eyes. Perfect. The man outside knocked twice on the steel door, not hard, almost politely. "I don't want any trouble," he said. Mike looked at me like he wanted to scream. I ignored him. "Who are you?" I called out. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he said something that made my blood run cold. "My name is Daniel Carter." I stared at Mike. He stared back. Carter. The same family name that appeared on the property records. The same family that had built North Star. I walked closer to the door. "Daniel Carter is dead." "I know." My stomach tightened. "Then who the hell are you?" A quiet laugh came from the other side. "Someone who knows more about your family than you do." Mike grabbed my shoulder. "Don't open it." I wasn't planning to. I looked around the vault. There had to be another way out. There wasn't. But then I noticed something behind the shelves, a narrow gap between two metal cabinets. I pushed one of the cabinets. It didn't move. I pushed harder. Nothing. Then I noticed a small metal lever behind it. I pulled it. Click. The entire cabinet shifted sideways. Behind it was a narrow passage. Mike stared at me. "You've got to be kidding." I wish I was. We slipped into the passage. I pulled the cabinet back into place. The man's voice came from the other side of the vault. "Running won't help you." We kept moving. The passage was barely wide enough for one person. We walked quickly until we reached a set of stairs. We climbed. At the top was a wooden door. I pushed it open. We came out inside an abandoned office on the second floor of the warehouse. I looked through the dirty window. There were 2 black SUVs parked outside, so Daniel Carter hadn't come alone. Mike looked at me. "Okay, this just got serious." I nodded. We moved toward the back of the building. There was another staircase leading down to an alley. We slipped outside and ran. We didn't stop until we reached my truck. Mike jumped into the passenger seat. I started the engine. "Drive!" I didn't need to be told twice. We peeled out of the alley. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then finally Mike said, "Your great-grandfather, what about him?" "If Daniel Carter is connected to the original Carter family," "Yeah? Then he might know what happened in 1968. I tightened the grip on the steering wheel. "That's what I want to know." We drove back to my house. I locked every door, closed every curtain. Then we spread the North Star documents across the kitchen table. I couldn't stop thinking about one thing, the missing final page, the document that activated the trust. Without it, the stock certificates might be worthless. I picked up the succession binder again. There had to be a clue. I flipped through every page. Nothing. Then I noticed something strange. The pages weren't numbered, except for one, page 47. At the bottom corner was a handwritten number, 3. Mike noticed it too. "Why is that page numbered?" I pulled it out. On the back was a message. The final document was never destroyed. It was moved to the first house. I looked up. The first house. Mike frowned. "What does that mean?" I turned to the old property map. There were 23 houses, but one was marked differently. Not number 1. It had a small star next to it. I grabbed my laptop and searched the address. My eyes widened. The property still existed, and it was only 15 minutes away. But there was something else. The house wasn't abandoned. Someone lived there. I called the number listed on the property records. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. Mike looked at me. "We're going there." I nodded. 20 minutes later, we were parked across the street. The house was small, white siding, blue shutters, nothing special. It looked like every other house on the block. But according to the North Star map, this was where the entire operation had started. I walked up to the front door. Before I could knock, it opened. An elderly man stood there. He was probably in his late 70s, gray hair, thick glasses, and the moment he saw me, his face changed. Not surprise,
recognition. He stared at me for several seconds. Then he said, "You're Edward's grandfather." I froze. "How do you know my grandfather?" He stepped aside. "Come in." Mike looked at me. I nodded. We entered. The inside of the house was filled with old photographs, dozens of them. Carter and Sons, North Star, my great-grandfather, the tunnels, the warehouse, everything. The old man closed the door. "My name is Samuel Carter." I stared at him. "You're a Carter?" He nodded. "The last one." I felt a chill. "Then you know about North Star." "I know everything." He walked toward an old cabinet. "My grandfather and your great-grandfather built it together." "Then why was my family never told?" Samuel looked at me. "Because your great-grandfather made a deal." "What kind of deal?" He opened the cabinet. Inside was a small wooden box. I stared at the box. "Me?" Samuel nodded. But there was one problem. He opened the box. Inside was an old envelope, sealed. My name was written on it, Michael Harrison. I stepped closer. How could my name be on something from 1968? Samuel didn't answer. He simply handed me the envelope. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was old, but the message was clear. "Michael, if you're reading this, North Star survived. Do not trust the Carters. Do not trust the lawyers. And most importantly, do not claim the money until you find the final property." I read it twice, then a third time. "The final property?" Samuel nodded. There were 23 properties, he pointed to the map, but there was supposed to be 24. Mike leaned forward. "Where's number 24? Samuel's face became serious. "That's the problem." He looked toward the window. "Nobody knows." I stared at him. "Then how do we find it?" Samuel slowly pointed at the envelope. "Your great-grandfather knew you'd ask that." He turned the paper over. There was another message written on the back. Just 6 words. "Start where the house was never built." I looked at Mike, then at Samuel. Neither of us understood, until Samuel whispered, "There's one more thing you need to know." "What?" He looked toward the front door. We weren't the only people looking for North Star. A car stopped outside. Samuel's face went pale. Black SUV, same one we'd seen at the warehouse. He grabbed my arm. "They found you." I looked through the window. 2 men stepped out. Samuel whispered, "Whatever you do, don't let them get the envelope." The front door shook. Someone had just kicked it, and this time there was nowhere left to run.
The front door shook again. Samuel grabbed my shoulder. "Back room, now!" Mike and I didn't argue. We ran through the hallway as the men outside slammed against the door again. I shoved open the nearest door. It was a tiny bedroom. Samuel followed us inside and locked it. "There's a window," Mike whispered. I looked outside. It was a 2-story drop. Great. Another impact shook the house. The lock on the front door cracked. Samuel looked at me. "The basement." "What about it?" "It connects to the old tunnel." I almost laughed. "Of course it does." He pulled a small key from his pocket. "There's an entrance behind the furnace." We followed him downstairs. The basement was much older than the rest of the house. Samuel moved a wooden shelf aside and revealed a metal door. He inserted the key. The door opened. A dark tunnel waited behind it. Mike looked at me. "I'm starting to hate tunnels." "You're not the only one." We stepped inside. Samuel closed the door behind us. We could hear footsteps upstairs. The men had gotten inside. "How far does this tunnel go?" I asked. "Far enough." "That's not an answer." "It wasn't supposed to be." We moved quickly through the darkness. Samuel knew exactly where he was going. He didn't need a flashlight. After several minutes, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. There were old wooden beams across the ceiling. Samuel stopped. "This is where North Star began." I looked around. "Here?" He nodded. "My grandfather discovered the first passage in 1967. He pointed toward the wall. They were building the original house when the ground collapsed.
Samuel walked toward an old section of brick. They found a natural underground passage. And then they realized it connected to something much bigger. He ran his hand along the wall. An underground water system, old service tunnels, forgotten foundations, places nobody had documented. I stared at him. So they turned it into a network? Exactly. But why? Samuel looked at me. Money. Of course. He explained that the Carter and Harrison families began buying properties connected to the tunnels. Then they started discovering abandoned infrastructure, old utility corridors, forgotten parcels of land, and eventually valuable development opportunities. They used information nobody else had. By the late 1970s, North Star had made them incredibly wealthy. But the two families eventually turned on each other. Your great-grandfather wanted out, Samuel said. Why? Because he realized the operation was becoming dangerous. What happened? Samuel sighed. Someone was stealing money. I thought about the documents. The Carters? He shook his head. Not all of them. He pointed toward the tunnel ahead. One of the original partners created a second company in secret. What company? Samuel didn't answer. Instead, he pulled another document from his coat. He handed it to me. At the top was a company name, Harrison Development Holdings. I recognized the surname, my family. You said my great-grandfather wanted out. He did. Then why create this? He didn't. I looked at Samuel. Then who did? Samuel stared at me. Your grandfather. I felt like the floor had dropped underneath me. My grandfather? He continued North Star after your great-grandfather disappeared. I stared at the document. My family had told me my grandfather had been a quiet mechanic, a normal guy. He'd never owned a company, never had money. At least that's what I'd been told. Samuel smiled sadly. Your family didn't know everything. I looked down at the document again. There was a signature. Richard Harrison, my grandfather. Then I noticed something else, a date, 1987, and beneath it was a list of assets, properties, companies, bank accounts, investments. The total value was enormous, but there was a final note, transferred to final property. I looked at Samuel. What is the final property? He shook his head. We never found it. But you said my great-grandfather knew. He did. Then where is it? Samuel pointed deeper into the tunnel. That's why we're here. We continued walking. The tunnel became wider. Eventually, we reached a massive underground chamber. There was an old metal staircase leading upward. At the top was a wooden hatch. Samuel looked at me. This is where the final property begins. I climbed the stairs. I pushed the hatch open. Sunlight hit my face. I climbed through, and then I stopped. We were standing inside an old abandoned building, but it wasn't a house. It was a train station, an old railroad station that had been closed for decades. I looked around. Where are we? Samuel climbed out behind me. The 24th property. Mike stared at him. This place? Samuel nodded. It was never on the public property maps. I walked toward the broken windows. Outside was a stretch of abandoned railroad track. Then I saw it, a sign, Harrison Terminal. My heart started pounding. That's my family's name. Samuel nodded. This station belonged to your great-grandfather. I couldn't believe it. Why was it abandoned? Because they found something beneath it. Mike walked toward us. What? Samuel pointed at the floor. The largest underground chamber in the entire North Star network. We pulled up old floorboards. Underneath was a steel hatch. It took both of us to open it. A staircase descended into darkness. I followed Samuel down. The chamber underneath the station was enormous. There were old storage rooms, metal lockers, wooden crates, and at the very back, a massive steel door. Unlike the warehouse vault, this one had no keypad, no lock, just a small metal plate. Samuel looked at me. Your great-grandfather designed this. What does it need? Your fingerprint. I laughed. You're gotta be kidding. Samuel shook his head. Put your hand on it. I hesitated. Then I placed my palm against the metal plate. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard a deep mechanical sound. Click. The door unlocked. It slowly opened. Inside was a room filled with boxes, but these weren't old boxes. They were sealed metal cases. Samuel stepped inside. This is everything. I walked toward the nearest case. There were documents, stock certificates, property deeds, bank records, and something else, a black folder. I opened it. The first page was a legal document. At the bottom was a signature, Richard Harrison, my grandfather. Then a document explained that the entire North Star fortune had been transferred into a trust, and the beneficiary was me. I couldn't speak. Mike stared at the numbers. "Dude, what?" I looked at him. "What?" He pointed at the final page. "Look at the estimated value." I looked. My hands started shaking. The number was so large that I had to read it 3 times. $18,742,600. Nearly $19 million, and that was before accounting for the properties, stock holdings, and assets that had continued appreciating for decades. I sat down. For years, I'd been struggling to pay rent. I bought a broken house for $37,000, and now I was sitting inside an underground room beneath an abandoned train station, staring at documents proving that my family had left me a fortune. But there was one problem, a very big problem. The trust document had a condition. I read it again, then again. It said, "The beneficiary shall receive all assets only after confirming that the North Star network remains undiscovered by unauthorized parties." I looked at Samuel. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the entrance. I heard something. Footsteps. Someone was coming down the stairs. Samuel's face changed. "It's too late." Mike whispered, "Who?" Samuel looked at me. "The people who have been hunting North Star for 30 years. The footsteps got closer. Then a man's voice echoed through the chamber. "Michael." I froze. I knew that voice. It was Daniel Carter. "You found the final property." He laughed. "And now," the footsteps stopped, "you found the money."
For a few seconds, nobody moved. Daniel Carter stood at the top of the stairs. 2 men were behind him. Samuel looked at me and whispered, "Don't do anything stupid." I almost laughed. That's a little late. Daniel slowly walked into the chamber. He looked exactly like a man who had been waiting for this moment his entire life. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He didn't need one. He had something else. A folder. He held it up. "You have the final property," he said. I looked at the folder in my hand. "You knew we'd find it." "I was hoping you would." Mike stepped forward. "Then why were you chasing us?" Daniel looked at him. "Because North Star isn't worth anything without the final document." I frowned. "What document?" Daniel smiled. "The one your great-grandfather and my grandfather built North Star together. When they started fighting, they divided the assets." He pointed toward the vault. "The Harrisons took the investments. The Carters took the properties. Then your great-grandfather created a trust that would eventually reunite everything." I shook my head. "Why?" "Because he knew the 2 families would destroy each other if they kept fighting." Daniel pulled another document from his folder. The trust required both families to cooperate. I looked at the document. There were 2 signatures, Edward Harrison and Daniel Carter's grandfather. "But if that's true," I said, "why have you been trying to stop me?" Daniel's expression changed. "Because my family was never supposed to lose control." Samuel stepped forward. "That's not what the agreement said." Daniel turned toward him. "You always were a traitor." Samuel didn't flinch. "No, I was the one who followed the agreement." Daniel's jaw tightened. Then he looked back at me. "You have the money." I nodded. "On paper." "Exactly." He took a step closer. "But you don't have control of it." I looked at the document again. The trust had conditions. One of them required verification from both family representatives, and according to the records, Samuel was the last living Carter representative. I looked at him. "Can you verify it?" Samuel nodded. "I've been waiting for you for 40 years. Daniel's face went pale. "Don't!" Samuel ignored him. He walked toward the metal case and pulled out a small stamp. He pressed it onto the final document. Verified. The room went silent. Then my phone buzzed. I looked down. An email from a law firm. Subject: North Star Trust, beneficiary confirmation. I opened it. The message was short. They had located the trust, they had verified the documents, and they were ready to begin transferring the assets. I stared at the screen. Mike looked over my shoulder. "Is that real?" I nodded. "I think so." Daniel suddenly stepped forward. "You don't understand what you're doing." I looked at him. "What do you mean? If you activate that trust, the entire North Star network becomes public." I frowned. "Why is that a problem?" "Because some of those properties were acquired illegally." There it was, the truth. North Star wasn't just a secret investment operation. Some of the original properties had been acquired through fraud. Some people had been pushed out. Some records had been hidden. And over the decades, the families had kept everything buried. Daniel wasn't trying to steal the money. He was trying to keep the past hidden. I looked at the documents, then at Samuel. "What happens if I activate it?" Samuel answered quietly. "You'll become rich. And I'll also become responsible for everything that comes with it." I sat down on the old wooden crate. For the first time, the money didn't excite me. It scared me. I'd spent my entire life thinking that becoming rich meant your problems disappeared. But sitting in that underground vault, I realized something. Sometimes, money doesn't erase problems. It just makes them bigger. I could walk away. I could leave the documents, sell my house, go back to my normal life. But then I remembered that night when I opened my banking app and saw $1,200. I remembered wondering how I was going to survive. I remembered working until midnight, driving a car that barely ran, eating cheap sandwiches for dinner. I wasn't going to throw away the opportunity, but I wasn't going to become like the people who came before me either. So I made a decision. I would take the money, but I would clean up the mess. I hired lawyers, accountants, property experts, forensic investigators. It took almost 2 years. 2 years of meetings, court documents, old records, arguments. People I'd never heard of suddenly contacting me. Some wanted money, some wanted land, some wanted answers. Eventually, the North Star Trust was settled. The original assets were valued at just under $19 million. After everything was sorted out, I personally received a little over $11 million. Not 19, 11. And honestly, 11 million was more than enough. I sold some of the properties, kept a few, paid every legitimate claim we could verify, and I donated a portion of the money to restore the old neighborhood. The house I originally bought for $37,000, I kept it. I renovated it completely, but I never covered up the tunnel. I turned the basement into a private office. Sometimes I still go down there. I still have the old photograph from 1968 hanging on the wall, the one with my great-grandfather standing beside the Carter family. And sometimes I stare at it and wonder how many people lived their entire lives without knowing what was underneath their feet. Mike still jokes about the whole thing. He calls it the dumbest house purchase in American history. Maybe he's right, because when I bought that house, everyone thought I was crazy. My realtor thought I was making a terrible decision. My friends thought I was wasting my money. Even I thought I was just buying a piece of junk because it was all I could afford. I had no idea I was buying the entrance to a fortune. And here's the part that still blows my mind. If that first board hadn't broken, if I hadn't decided to renovate the basement, if I hadn't heard that hollow sound underneath the concrete, I would have never found the tunnel. I would have never found North Star. I would have never found my family's secret, and I definitely wouldn't be sitting here today with millions of dollars in the bank. People ask me sometimes if I think it was luck. I tell them yes, absolutely. But luck only got me through the front door.
I still had to open it. I still had to walk into the tunnel, and I still had to decide what to do when I discovered what was waiting at the end. Because the truth is, I didn't get rich because I bought a cheap house. I got rich because I was willing to look underneath it. And even now, years later, whenever I hear somebody say, "There's nothing valuable in that old house," I just smile, because I know better. Sometimes, the thing that changes your life isn't sitting on top of the floor. Sometimes, it's buried underneath it.
Before you go, hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable stories just like this one. See you in the next story.